This was the opening salvo of the Russo-Japanese War, and it shattered a belief that had governed global politics for centuries: the unquestioned supremacy of European empires. For the first time in modern history, an Asian nation struck a devastating blow against one of Europe's great powers, and the shockwaves would ripple all the way to the trenches of 1914. But why did Japan attack? And why did Russia, a colossus stretching across two continents, find itself so utterly unprepared? The answer lay in Manchuria and Korea. Both empires wanted control of these territories. Russia had stationed over 100,000 troops in Manchuria and secured a lease on Port Arthur, giving its navy a warm water port in the Pacific. Japan, which had spent decades rapidly modernizing its military along Western lines, viewed Russian expansion as an existential threat. Diplomatic negotiations dragged on through 1903. Russia stalled. Japan decided to act. Admiral Togo Heihachiro, commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet, had studied Western naval tactics meticulously. He understood that surprise and speed could neutralize Russia's numerical advantage. So, he struck before war was even declared, a tactic that would echo 40 years later at Pearl Harbor. The initial torpedo attack damaged 2 Russian battleships and a cruiser. But this was only the beginning. Over the following months, Japanese forces besieged Port Arthur by land and sea, enduring horrific casualties in trench warfare that eerily foreshadowed the Western Front. Consider this: at the siege of Port Arthur, Japanese soldiers charged into barbed wire under machine gun fire. They dug elaborate trench systems. They used hand grenades and indirect artillery bombardment. Officers who would later study the First World War could have found their textbook here, yet most European military observers dismissed these lessons. They told themselves that what happened between Russians and Japanese simply wouldn't apply to civilized European warfare. That arrogance would cost millions of lives a decade later. The war's climax came on May 27, 1905, in the Tsushima Strait. Russia had sent its Baltic fleet on an 18,000-mile voyage around Africa and across the Indian Ocean, a journey of 7 months. To relieve Port Arthur, they arrived exhausted, their ships fouled with barnacles, their crews demoralized. Admiral Togo was waiting. In barely 48 hours, the Japanese Navy destroyed virtually the entire Russian fleet. 21 Russian ships were sunk. Over 4,000 Russian sailors perished. Japan lost 3 torpedo boats. The Treaty of Portsmouth, brokered by American President Theodore Roosevelt in September 1905, ended the conflict. Japan gained control of Korea and a dominant position in Manchuria. Russia stumbled into revolution at home. But here is what matters most for our story. This war didn't just redraw maps in East Asia. It destabilized the entire European balance of power. Russia's humiliating defeat weakened the Tsar's regime and forced Russia to redirect its ambitions westward, toward the Balkans, directly into Austria-Hungary's sphere of influence. That collision of interest created the powder keg that exploded in 1914. Meanwhile, colonized peoples from India to Egypt to Ireland watched Japan's victory with astonishment. If one non-European nation could defeat a European empire, perhaps others could too. A surprise attack in a frozen harbor didn't just start a war. It cracked the foundations of an entire world order. And if you think the consequences ended there, wait until you hear what happened when those same imperial rivalries collided in Sarajevo.